Another thing I'd like to remind people about is to create some kind of home in your house for your ancestors. Again, this is something that is done all around the world except in Western culture. You can create a home on your altar, or you can do something elaborate. When I studied with the Ulchi grandfather, he was the last male shaman of the Ulchi people, Grandfather Misha. His people would create elaborate spirit houses. And you could decorate them however you want in your life, but some kind of container that is dedicated for them to have a place in your house. So you're honoring, when you do that, you are honoring the fact that they are alive. They are present in your life. You may want to put a little bit of food there in the morning, a little bowl of water, some little food, making that connection more and more real for yourself. For the Ulchi, they would have a special, they'd honor the spirits every day of their ancestors, but they'd also have a special day, I think it was the second full moon in February, if I'm right. And without my notes, that's the closest you're going to get. They would have a special day where the day before, they would cook and stay up all day, the whole day and into the night, where they would make the food for the celebration. And they'd be thinking about their ancestors and telling stories about the ones they remember and bringing them back to mind. And then they would have a great feast. They'd open up the curtain. They'd have a little curtain over the top of the box. They would open the curtain so that their ancestors could participate in the big feast and celebration. And it was a way for them to renew their connections every year with the people that made them possible. The people who first learned to fish where they were. They grew up, that culture grew along the Amur River. And so the fruits of the river were very important to them. And they were also close to the taiga, the great forests. So the ancestors taught them how to harvest animals from the forest, how to harvest fish from the rivers, how to know when the best time to do things. Those things were passed on because, remember, for all of us, at one point, even we Western trained people, our ancestors were illiterate. They were part of an oral culture. And elders were very important in an oral culture because they were the libraries. An elder, or if you had several elders, you were really quite wealthy in that you had all of this experience that you could learn from. They would show you how to do things that they had maybe tried the wrong way and finally figured out the right way, and you didn't have to reinvent the wheel. They would teach you what they had learned, and knowing that you would continue that process and refine and do whatever it is that you did in your life to make that story rich for the next generation. And the interesting thing about oral stories, cultures that have transmitted wisdom orally transmit it so accurately. We're kind of lazy. We have books and now we have the internet. We don't have to remember anything. We can just ask Siri, right? Just press the button on your phone and you can know anything you want to know. In an oral culture, you would have to memorize the stories. They would be told to you over and over and over again, and you memorize them. And in memorizing them, you would have basically internalized the library and internalized it so well that those stories would be transmitted intact for as many as thousands of years. If you look at the Australian Aboriginal people, their songline stories have existed for close to 50,000 years. You can actually find your way across the continent of Australia using the songlines, because there were separated groups of Aboriginal people on that continent. And in order to have a spouse that would not be of your genetic line, you'd have to traipse to one of those other places to find a spouse. And so you had to have accurate information about where to find them. And that meant crossing the outback. But the information in the stories told them exactly how to get there, exactly where the water holes were, exactly where you could find food. And the same thing, this is a more recent example, the people of Flores, a little island of Flores, where they discovered a new kind of fossil human. They call them Homo floresiensis, or they nicknamed them the Hobbit, because they were very short. And the people of Flores told stories about these little brown people for what is 12,000 years, because that species died out at least 12,000 years ago. So they were talking about these little brown people that lived over there. And when the paleontologists were digging over there, they found fossils of little people. So stories are also part of the weaving that your ancestors have for you. I was blessed to be raised in a family with a mother and father and their siblings, grandmothers and grandfathers on both sides and their siblings, and a great-grandmother and her siblings. I was surrounded by a sea of gray hair when I was a little girl. And they were all storytellers. So I have internalized those, and that's part of my fabric. But you can go and meet the ancestors that are in your DNA and learn their stories. Learn what they held safe inside of them and capture that. Make it a part of your weaving, and maybe tell those stories to the children and grandchildren in your life. Because they are like fairy tales in some ways. They are from a long time ago, when we lived very differently. And we thought of the earth very differently than we think of her now. We thought of the animals as our relatives, and we thought of the plants as our companions in the world. So finding a way to get those stories from your own ancestors. You know, we read storybooks about other people's cultures and those folk tales that have been preserved, and we learn about them. But imagine collecting inside of yourself the stories of your own ancestors, how they related to the land, what was important to them, how did they learn how to do things in the world. All of that is available to us. I mean, that's why I love the gift of shamanic journeying for myself, but also dreaming. Because if you hold an intent, those of you who don't know how to journey, if you hold an intent very strongly just before you go to sleep, relax yourself, turn off all of your things that buzz and beep and shine blue light into your eyes. Shut them all off a little bit before you go to bed so you can relax. And then go into a place of gratitude. You've got your jammies on, or whatever, however you prepare for bed. You got your jammies on. Allow yourself to feel grateful for your day. And then have an intent that you want a message, a teaching story even, to come to you in your dreams from your ancestors. And keep that intention for a few nights and then see what happens. You may get a scrap at first, or you may get a little stream and it feels like this dream of a dream you've never had before. Write it down, because they want to speak to us. And sometimes we have to get our conscious mind out of the way to receive it. So whether you journey or you meditate or you use the power of your dreams, connect with them. Again, they love you utterly. They want to be your companions, and they will tell you the most marvelous stories. That was the gift of being around people who were several generations older than I was as a little girl, because they told me stories about New York before there were cars, when they had horses and buggies and all of these things that I had only read about in books. They lived. And to be able to have even much, much further back, you know, you probably have an herbalist in your line, because that's how people were able to survive. They needed herbal medicine. It wasn't just you went to the doctor somewhere. Everybody had a little bit of herbal knowledge. Everybody had a little bit of this and a little bit of that to survive. So all that you really want to know that's fundamental to life, not how to program your computer, because they won't know how to do that. But they'll know how it is to be a person who loves and has lost love. They know what it's like to be a person who struggles with some kind of ailment. They know what it's like to feel as though you want to give so much to your children and maybe you don't have the resources to do that. And how can you make up that deficit with pouring a little more love into the vessel instead of more stuff? The ancestors have that more profound wisdom, because the knowledge of programming of computer is important to us in our time, but it's part of that bigger picture. It's how we make our way in the world. And that is something that they can help us to do. How is it that we can be a good person? How can we be the best at of who we are? The ancestors have those keys. And they are more than willing to share everything that they have learned with us. They're willing to share their hearts with us. They're willing to share the stories of where they came from with us. So you might meet them as a name in Ancestry.com or one of those other services, 23andMe. You might meet them as this person, but you have no idea who that person is. And so if you meet them in one of those, you say, you have this name, supposedly my fourth great-grandfather. Who is that? You could ask that person to make themselves clear to you in a dream, or go to visit them in a journey. And say, hello, there's 4 generations between us, but I would really love to meet you. I've done this with my own great-great-grandmother. She died before I was born, and she was an herbalist. And she made a drawing salve that is very effective at taking the infected tissue out of a wound so it heals well. And she didn't leave recipes or teach her 5 daughters how to make medicine because they didn't want to. That was old stuff to them. They didn't want to learn that old stuff. So in learning to journey, early on in my journey career, I said, if this process is really real, because, I have healthy skepticism like everybody, I want to prove to myself it's real. It's a good way to find hidden wisdom. Okay, I want to know how to make grandma's salve. Again, my great-great-grandmother. So in Journeys, I got to meet her, and she showed me how to make the salve, which once I gathered all the ingredients and made it, it smelled the same as what I remember as a child. It worked the same as the one I remembered when I was a child. And when my great aunt came to visit, I'm named after her, I asked, Aunt Ev, just sit on the couch. I want you to smell something. And she was one of the granddaughters that my great-great-grandmother took care of when her daughter had to go to work. So I said, Aunt Ev, close your eyes. And I unscrewed the jar, and I put it under her nose. I said, okay, smell it. And she exclaimed as her eyes flew open, it's grandma's medicine. So there is something that person is no longer alive in her physical body. She's alive in mine. And whether I contacted her spirit in the journey, or did I awaken something inside of myself, we'll probably never know. But even though there was a 3-generation gap between us, I can make that salve. And that same kind of process is available to you. Call out to your ancestors, ask them for help, think about them before you tackle anything. Because you want the accumulation of 1,000 generations or more of wisdom when you tackle something. You want the strength that they have, the courage that they have. I mean, they lived through things that we cannot even imagine. They lived through famines and war and pestilence and natural disasters, and yet they managed to make it long enough to deliver the package of DNA so that we'd have a next generation. So there's a lot of accumulated power there. Power in the shamanic sense of energy, power in terms of wisdom, power in terms of skill, and of course, power in terms of love. So I urge you to make contact with your ancestors. There's so much there. There's endless resources there for you. You just start to scratch the surface and you'll start to see how miraculous it can be.
I understand that you're going to take us on a guided journey into our DNA to access ancestral resources that can support us. It sounds like this is what you're talking about here.